Hey there folks, so in our previous video we've set up the rotation element of our tool, so now we're able to select something in our scene and we're able to rotate it by set rotational values or even reset it back to the world rotation. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at borrowing some of the stuff that we've already done for location, such as the X, Y, Z. In this case this is going to be roll, pitch and yaw. And we're going to look at how we can actually define set values that we want to rotate by. So we can obviously put in a set value and we can say, I want to rotate round by that amount, but also having a look at how we can do some random rotation. So we could say, I want to press a button and it will rotate it randomly on that X, Y, or Z value. Okay, so we're over inside our editor utility widget now, our level tools demo one that we've got. We've got our rotation tools, all the fixed numbers, and we've also got this additional horizontal box that we made in the last video. And what I want us to do is I want us to start taking some of the stuff that exists from the previous ones and copying it down here for us to use. So if we go and have a look for this X element here, we know that it's in a horizontal box. So there's a long box here. We've got a vertical box that contains the X, which is the text, and then the checkbox. So I'm just going to take those elements, I'm going to copy them, I'm going to go down to the bottom horizontal box that we had and paste them in there. Now the first part I want to change is making a choice of how I want to present this to the user. Now most people should be able to remember and should recall that X, Y, Z relates to roll, pitch and yaw. But if you're unsure on that one, what you could do is you could write roll and then put the X in the brackets after it and see whether that helps you remember. The only thing you've got here now is obviously that's going to be much wider than the X that we did there. So you might want to have a bit of a play with some of those alignment values. You can see that the text is aligned in the middle. So maybe our checkbox, we want to align that centrally as well. So it appears in the middle of that. But once that's done, we can now look at this checkbox and go, okay, well, this is check X axis. Let's go with check roll X, and that'll do. I think we'll leave it that as it is. It's unchecked by default. And let's go and take that, copy it, and you guessed it, we're going to duplicate it twice. I'm not going to duplicate it directly into itself because that puts it below, but there we got roll, pitch, and yaw. So let's actually change these values over to the ones that they should be. So pitch is going to be rotating round the y-axis, and we're going to rename this. So rather than pitch X, rather than roll X, it's going to be pitch Y. And then this one is going to be yaw, and we'll go with a Z. Okay, and again we're going to rename this one. So rather than roll X, it's yaw Z. Okay. Now, a couple of things you might want to do in here. You might want to look at these vertical boxes, maybe adding a little bit of padding so you can add some space to them. So like just a simple thing like adding 5 padding to the side of this on the left helps these obviously have some space from each other. But best way to do it is just compile it, save it, just go and have a look and see what that looks like. You can see that they're, at least with their individual padding, they've created a bit of spacing from each other. Okay, so let's go back into our graph over here. I have copied the XYZ axis boxes, and we know that they exist inside of the location category because obviously they're location ones that I've copied and duplicated. So let's just take our checkboxes for pitch and roll and yaw, and let's just change their category over to rotation. So I'll do that one. I'm going to change the roll X one over to our rotation category as well, and let's have a look at our yaw one as well, and let's just take that over to rotation. So what we should now see is that we've got checkbox for pitch Y, roll X and yaw Z. Last little bit we're going to want to do in here is we're going to add some variables. They're going to need to be a boolean, so we can leave them as the default. And this one, what we'll do is it's going to be our X rot, or we could put it as let's go with that. Let's go with roll X rot offset, and with that done, I'll duplicate that. So we'll take it and we'll duplicate it, but this one will be our pitch Y rot offset, and we can actually get rid of that 0 that's at the end of it because obviously it's not the same name anymore. And we'll take another one of those and we will change it to yaw Z. So lots of just copying the same things over, renaming them, But once all these things are obviously set up, it's very similar to everything that we've already done. So let's go and have a look at these checkboxes and what we need to do for them. There's only one event we can add for a checkbox, which is on check state changed. So when the actual state, the unchecked or the checked version of it actually changes, this will get triggered. So let's add one of those for each one of these. And what we'll do, we'll just drag them up close to each other because there's not really a lot of extra details we need to worry about other than drag in the roll X boolean and align it up. Drag in the pitch Y. We don't want to get it, sorry, we want to set it. And then we want to take the Z one as well. And we just want to plug these in because we want to say that when you actually edit this, when you check or uncheck this box, we just want to set this boolean here to equal whatever that box equals. So if it's checked, the boolean's checked. If it's unchecked, then the boolean is obviously going to be false. So just aligned all those up. Let's just take them and drag them over to here. And obviously now we've got our set amount, but we've also got our checked amounts. Okay, so what do we next need? Well, let's go and add ourselves in a set input box for text, very similar to what we got for our offset amount. So I'm going to look at this offset amount. It's just some text that exists and it's our spin offset box. So why not, let's just take those again. Let's copy that. So I'm going to press Control C and I'm just going to go to this horizontal box and go Control V. You can see the text is brought over its padding, which is going to be great for us. And rather than saying offset amount, let's have our rotation. Go with rotation amount, or actually let's go with degrees. Rotation degrees might make more sense. Yeah, we want to make it so that anybody using this tool can look at it and understand what that value is associated with straight away. Now, an easy one of this one is the value. Let's set it over to maybe like 90, because that would be a very sensible number for us to have. Now, minus 500, probably not the best number for us to have on a rotational value. Let's go with minus 360 through to 360. And that's going to give us the full actual range of rotation. We can rotate it a full 360 in one direction or a full 360 in the other direction. And we'll default it to 90 so that if we are using any buttons, that's going to allow us to obviously increase or decrease by this set amount here. Okay, so with that now done, what we can start having a look at is how we can use that to define our value. So I'm going to go back again into my graph. I'm going to go find those ones. We didn't rename that spin offset box, so let's just actually rename it because we don't want to have that causing us any problems. So rotation degrees, that would be a good name to have for it. And obviously rotation degrees suggests it probably should be in our rotation section. I'm going to have a look at this. We have a look at the values we did on the last one. So you can see we did an on value changed, promote it to an offset amount float. So let's do the same thing here. We're going to take it. We're going to make an on value changed event for it. We'll drag it over and we can, in this instance, just rotate, promote it to a variable. And we'll call this one, rather than in value, because that doesn't really tell us much, we'll take this as the rotation degrees. Now, I'm not doing it as rotation degrees to add or to subtract or anything like that, only because what I'm actually going to find is I might use this as a positive or a negative. I'm going to add some buttons in that allow us to either use this to move it in one direction or another. Now, this next element is going to be very, very similar to the stuff that we did over here when we did our actor offset of location. We created a function that allowed us to add our offset amount on. We're going to do a very similar thing here. Now, I'm going to create them as two separate functions. You might want to create it as one so that it's nice and easy to just pass through whether it's positive or negative. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the functions. We've got add location offset, add random location offset. So let's do an add rotation, and we can do add rotation offset or add rotation amount. Doesn't really matter what we do with that one. I'm going to call it add rotation offset for now. I'm going to add an input, and the input that I'm going to pass through is going to be a rotator, because I'm actually going to pass through the actor's current rotation. So let's give it that name, actor rotation. And it's going to have all of its elements, its roll, pitch, and yaw, its X, Y, Z rotations. It's going to have each of those potentially modified, and then at the end, it's going to output with a return node, and it's going to give it the modified rotation. So we'll put modified rotation as the output here. Okay, and it's just going to go straight through from one through to the other. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the current rotation that we're bringing in, and we're going to break that rotator, which allows us to have the X, the Y, and the Z. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take our rotation amount, our rotation degrees. So I'm going to get that, and we're going to take our roll, our current rotation, and I'm going to minus, so I'm going to subtract that rotation degrees from that. So I'm just going to get this set up once, and once it's set up, we'll be able to duplicate this for each of them. So we can just make the same process multiple times. And then if you remember from our location option, we could just take this value and put it in, but we want to know whether we should be editing that. Well, that is where we can start having a look at having a select float and saying, well, should we use one float value or should we use the other float value? And the decision on that one is going to be based on this roll X rot offset. So when our tick box, our checkbox is ticked, this is true. If this is true, then it picks A. So we're saying, yes, we want to use the modified value. Whereas if it's false, it'll use B, and B is just going to be the default value. So we can say, I want to use the unmodified value. So I've got that tidied up there. And with that tidied up, what I can now do is just take this bit that we've just done. I'm going to duplicate a version of it there and duplicate a version of it there. And the next one is going to have the Y. So we've got our pitch Y rot. And then we've got our Z, so a yaw Z rot. And we'll take them, plug them in, and that one should be pitch, and that one should be yaw. Now I'm just going to move these over so we can see it a little bit clearer. There you go. But now we've got the option to decide whether we should or shouldn't use a modified X, a modified Y. And the last thing I've just noticed is actually I've used a minus. So let's just change each of those to a plus, and that'll fix. In fact, yeah, let's change them. And then I'm just thinking you could, if you don't want to have to go through and change them, you could just rename this function to be a subtract function, because obviously that's what it's already doing. Let's just take that. The other thing you can do, and I'll just show you this, you can, if you've made mistakes, you can hold down control and you can drag connections to a different one. So you can just really quickly change the actual thing that it's being plugged into. Okay, so now we've got 3 different values, and we want to take those 3 values and turn them into a rotator. Well, if we drag backwards from this rotation value, we can say make rot, and we've got a whole bunch of different make rots here, but the bottom one is make rotator. And you can see it takes in 3 values, an X, Y, and Z, a roll, pitch, and yaw, and it outputs 1 rotational value. So here I've got comes in, modifies, potentially modifies, and then obviously outputs that for me. And once that's done, you can take that and you can duplicate that function and you can subtract rotation offset. So everything that we've just done, we can do the same again, but this would be where we would want a subtract node. So I'm just going to add in a subtract node. I'm just going to change these connections, and this is where I said you could just rename the one we just done to a subtract, and now you'd be doing a version of it that is a an add version. But you can see it shouldn't take very long to just reconnect all these elements up. Okay, so that's the middle one done to a subtract and bottom one done to a subtract. Now you could be clever, and you could have an input that comes in choosing whether it's a subtract or an add, and then maybe inside of here we can do like a negative, like a multiply by -1 to decide whether it's adding or subtracting. But just for now, to make it nice and simple, we've got our add rotation offset and our subtraction rotation offset. And those functions are also, if we just select them, we're going to make sure that they are pure, so we can just go straight through them. And there we go. Now what we can do is we can go back into our event graph and we can start actually using these. So how do we use these? Well, they are used very similar to what we did with this option up here. We're going to loop through our current selected actors, but instead of getting actor location and modifying actor location and setting actor location, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it as obviously actor rotation. Now, what buttons would I like to press for this? At the moment, I don't actually have any buttons in here. So let's go back and let's add in somewhere for those buttons to exist. Now I've got a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. So let's have a look. We've got this horizontal box. We've got this horizontal box. So this box here, this main vertical box for rotation tools, I'm going to add in an extra horizontal box in there. And in here, let's take one of our buttons that we've already done and let's duplicate it and copy it in there. Now, what is this one going to be doing? Well, this one, I want to keep it simple. I want to go with add rotation. And you could write it yourself if you want to. And we'll go with this one being add rotation. And then the next one, I'm going to actually just take that and I'll do all three of them while we're here. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to select the horizontal box, copy, select the horizontal box, copy. We've got an add rotation. We've got a negative rotation. So that one can actually be called that. So rather than add rotation, we'll go with sub rotation, or subtraction. And this last one we'll do random. Even though we haven't done the random function yet, we'll just let it be random. So random rot. There you go. So we've got three new buttons. We've got a button to add rotation, a button to subtract rotation, and then a random rotation. The concept of this, the idea with this is that you could type in a value here. So you could say 90 and it would, clicking on this one, it would add 90. Click on this one, it would be minusing 90. Very similar to what we've got here. In fact, what we might want to do is just change the ordering of those so it matches up with the negative on one side and the positive on the other. Maybe even putting random in the middle so it matches up perfectly. But now you can see if I was to change this to potentially like 15, this would minus 15 and this one would add 15. So it allows us to rotate in either direction. Okay, so with those buttons set up, what we can now do is obviously go find those buttons and we can see that they are probably appearing in unwanted locations. Actually, no, they were copied from our rotation section, so we can at least see now that they are in the correct one. So we've got add rotation off. So the add rotation one here on pressed. We've got our sub rotation, so we're doing on pressed, and then we've got our random rot, so we're doing on pressed of that one as well. Okay, so there's our three new events. Let's drag these over. And let's do the same process we've been doing for everything else. We'll get our current selected actors, so the actors that we currently have selected in our scene. We'll use a for each loop to go through every single one of those. So I'll just duplicate this in a moment and make multiple versions of it. Rather than getting actor location, we're going to get actor rotation. Now this one is our add rotation. So I'm just going to add the rotation function into there. So we take it and then we modify it. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take the array element from the for each loop and we're going to say I want to set actor rotation, and we can set the new rotation, which is the modified rotation that has just gone through that function. Okay, so with that done, what we can do now is we can take all of these nodes and duplicate them. And the only thing I need to change on the subtraction one is rather than add rotation, we'll use our subtract rotation. And that's going to give me two functions now being used. This one here will add based on that value. This one here will subtract based on that value. And then the last thing that we're going to do is add in a random element. Now the random element, what we'll do for that one is we will do something very similar to what we've already got. Let's duplicate the add rotation, but this one will be add random rotation. Now for all the other examples, obviously we've used rotation degrees. So what we can do here is we can instead go with random float in range. What is the range that we might want to go with this one? Well, for now, let's just go with 0 to 360. We don't need to rotate it in both directions because 0 to 360 will cover both of those for us. And all I'm going to do is just use this for each of these values over here. So instead of the one that we're defining, we can have it use a random rotational value, and obviously that goes through and adds it on. Okay, so let's go back to the event graph and let's take everything we've just done again, duplicate it down here, and again, instead of using the subtract rotation, let's use the add random rotation, and let's plug that in. And now we have got 3 individual new functions where we can add the rotation on, subtract the rotation, or have a random rotation. And that's going to be based on these values that we are using inside of here. So whatever this rotation degrees is set at. Now there's an important thing here that we've got this rotational degrees box, this spin box, and we've set it to have a value of 90 at the start. But at the moment, we are only setting rotation degrees when we change that spin box. So the last thing that we just need to make sure that we do is we go and find our begin play, which is our initial starting values. And this one, I just want to take the spin box rotation degrees. I want to get the value of that. So we'll go and get value. And I want to set my offset amount, which is now my rotation degrees. I want to set that to equal whatever the value is that's in there as a starting point. So even if you haven't changed it from 0, it'll change it to 0. If you've changed it to anything else, at least now it equals 90 because that was the starting value. Okay, so that should be done. Let's go and test that out in the scene. Okay, so I'm back in my scene now. You can see I've obviously got all these crates laid out. I'm just going to select a whole bunch of these crates, and I'm just going to go to my select tool and select the actors in level. Just to kind of make this easier, I'm going to go with the reset because we know our reset is in there. So you can see they're all now facing in exactly the same direction. They've all been set up to be 0, 0, 0 to the world's rotation. And now I can come over here and I can say, okay, well, let's click on the yaw value. If I was to go with 90, which is the default, I can add 90 or subtract 90. What about if I went with 45? I could add 45, or I could even change it to 15, and then I could subtract the 15. I could obviously reset them back again. And what about if we select random? Well, random, remember, doesn't use this spin. It just takes a random 360 value. So every single one of those rotates around. And I'm obviously saying on the yaw, but if you wanted to, you could rotate every single one of them completely randomly on all 3 of their axes. So that's going to give you a lot of control. If you want to place an object, you want to place a crate out into a pile of dirt or something, you could now add these values, and rather than having to come in here and change the rotational tool and rotate it a little bit on one direction and switch back and forth between world and local, what we can do here is we could just add some random offsets, add some random values, or more easily going through and saying, do I want to rotate all of these walls as a set group, or do I want to go through and just have each one of them have a random rotation to them? So you can obviously reset those. Just got to make sure that they are the selected actors in the scene. And randomly rotate, so they can be completely individual and completely random with their placement. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.